A brief retelling of the 7 parts, here we go. A giant crack opened up. The kid overdosed and discovered his powers. A dozen years later, he's a hardcore speedrunner in the woods. Makes friends and then loses them all at once. Meets a block of ice, blows a bong and overdoses again. Wears contact lenses, launches the wall hack and AM bot, picks up drops from the ice block. Next year, he walks around the dungeons as a fool. While everyone fights monsters, he gets useful stuff for himself, grudgingly helps his teammates by making weapons. In one of these dungeons meets the head of the guild, who has his hands grow out of the wrong place and constantly breaks all the weapons. The creator was able to make a sword that the guild leader couldn't break. Since then, Taehyun has become a secret admirer and has been stalking the guy in every possible place trying to recruit him into his guild, but has been unsuccessful. Meanwhile, a maniacal hunter destroying and his mistress appear. Sean Song signs a contract to receive all sorts of resources in exchange for weapons from the creator, but everything must remain a secret, so that no one will know of the creator's abilities. Meets a blonde girl and deprives her of... opens her up to new possibilities by giving her one of his contact lenses. Then there comes a point where the two guilds join together to close the super-duper gate, where they meet a girl and she turns out to be not a girl but a vampire. But Chanson was happy with the new find. He always liked rough girls who like to suck blood, a little strangulation, and the guy is happy. He now has a personal kitten. Next, he has his first encounter with a maniac, and in this fight, his right arm is amputated. His boss rescues him from a hot spot and suggests he douse himself with a highly questionable drug from a DIY first aid kit. Surprisingly, it works, and he grows a new arm. After a while, there's a second round in which a maniac is defeated by cough medicine. After gaining strength, Shanson nearly defeats his opponent, but the Dark Priestess herself ends the round by decapitating her partner like a female praying mantis. Chanson faints and is taken in by another guild leader, and to keep him from getting rowdy, his hands are tied. After a heart-to-heart talk and tea party, Taehyun comes in, and they decide how they're going to track down the Dark Priestess. After some more time, Chanson gets into the office of the Sky Islands to help her friend get certified. Before they can enjoy the fresh, rarefied air, very strange things start happening in the office. The rapid response team that was dispatched to the rescue responded very quickly. Another group of hunters arrived and tried to support the response team, as best they could, both mentally and physically. It looked like it was all spin, but the weapon maker came and drank to their health, made new acquaintances, cooked KFC, and beat everyone, almost. When the party broke up, Chanson was on a heavy withdrawal. After a while, the guy decided to have a cup of coffee. He called Taehyun and told him what party he had missed. The guild leader was upset that he hadn't been invited.
You what?
Also, Chonson told a couple of fables about his past lives, where he met an incredible creature. His tales were so impressive that Taehyung asked the creator for his hand in marriage. After receiving the wedding gift, Chanson went to his mother in the village. Yes, she was alive. Hi, Sung Jin Woo. As it is supposed to be in the village, there is plenty of work to do. First, to milk a small bucket and clean the barn. Meanwhile, the furball gets a unique assignment and goes in search of Valerian. Upon arriving at the right address, the cat notices a very strange salesman. There is a conflict between them over discounts on the product.
The guy was somehow the first to know about the cat and approached her. Suddenly, another system message appeared in front of Elizabeth. The search mission was completed, and Elizabeth was rewarded. The opportunity to act on her own within 5 minutes. She does not understand why she needs this right, or what she should use it for. The guy is surprised that even cats can be players in this world. "Didn't you do some mischief to my men before this?" the boy asked. But the system wouldn't give such a search mission after what had happened. Elizabeth wondered how he could see the system windows of others. And at that moment, the guy was approaching the cat with a knife hidden behind his back. He said there was no need for her to know such things, for she was going to die soon anyway. "Just know there's a man who supports me," the blonde man said, coming closer and closer. While Elizabeth was trying to figure out what was going on, she received the system message again. Bound quest activated. Strange quests again? Approaching the right distance, the guy pulled a knife from behind his back. He focused on the target and took a swing for the throw. The cat was engrossed in studying the task, and the knife was coming toward her with great speed. With a satisfied meow, she realized what was required of her. The knife was already a few inches away from its target. Elizabeth didn't even look in his direction. There is a huge explosion, and the cat flies a great distance into the air. Upon landing, she takes on her original appearance as a vampire. all thanks to the reward received for the completed quest. Also, Elizabeth had a new hidden quest. It was in addition to the first one, and the task was to apprehend suspicious people. The time of execution is 5 minutes. The reward: a fragment of the source, 1 of 5. Looking at the vampire, the boy was surprised. He thought that the system in this world had been activated quite recently. There's no way someone capable of dodging his knives would show up here. Elizabeth doesn't listen to the guy at all. She just reads the system messages. Now she wants to understand what a source fragment is. A new window unfolded. Most likely, there was a description of the very source fragment. Not a bad reward for you, Elizabeth said. The blonde man was not pleased with the woman's tone. He didn't like that she was treating him like a monster. I'm a human being, or am I? The boy said thoughtfully. This guy is probably a member of the Empty Fantasy Guild. The vampire wished he knew more, but there was no time for idle talk. Judging by the fact that the mission doesn't specify destroying the target, only delaying it, it's enough for Elizabeth to cripple the target. Maybe she should just deprive him of his legs. After hearing such speculations, the guy only muttered something unhappily. Should I just die? The boy asked. Elizabeth hadn't expected such a question. Looking at the vampire, the guy judged her to be a pretty strong opponent. The blonde didn't want to waste energy on someone he wasn't open to raiding. The woman didn't know what she was talking about. Is the guy really willing to sacrifice himself just so she can get the reward for the quest? Elizabeth was outraged by the blonde man's behavior. First he attacks her first, and then he changes his mind? The boy replied that since he couldn't finish everything with one attack, there was no point in resisting. I'm the kind of person who only works at the behest of a superior, said the blonde man. After saying that, the guy also got a system message. The system responded by telling him that he was a cunning scoundrel. After reading this message, the boy was surprised. Afterward, he got a customized quest, and a nasty grin stretched across the guy's face. This mission is the one from Idle Fantasy. Objective: destroy the target in front of the player. Time: 5 minutes. Reward: 10 billion won. Apparently, the guy was deliberately playing the victim to get a reward quest, and the system went along with his schemes. Suit yourself. Instead of engaging in this stupid conversation, I'd rather torture you, Elizabeth said disappointedly. But it wasn't to be. The guy materialized the katana and said that while she was wasting her time with silly musings, the boss had managed to secure him a job. The message appeared in front of Elizabeth's face again. All players in this area have accepted the quest. PvP arena is activated. Only players participating in PvP can access the arena. Dimension isolation has been successfully activated. This message line was incomprehensible to Elizabeth. The vampire saw the blue mana and thought the opponent was attacking, and tried to block the attack. But as it turns out, it's just that PvP zone. The dome has covered the players. PvP battle begins. Now no one will know what's going on here, said the guy with a creepy smile on his face. Elizabeth, noticing the blonde's manic behavior, assumed that he had lost his mind. The guy blew his head off the vampire's shoulders, not letting her finish her speech. The woman had taken stock of the fact that if her skill had been delayed even a little bit, she would be dead by now. Smiling nastily, the guy turned to his opponent. His blade felt nothing. Elizabeth uses the bloodbath territory skill, flooding the arena with blood magic. How dare you! Shouted the boy, rushing to the attack. At this point, Elizabeth dodges the attack and uses thirsty hands. Seeing the huge bloody hands, the blonde man senses that it's not that simple. Gotcha, Elizabeth said with a smile. Something unlikely happens. With tremendous speed, the katana hits the ground, and another sword materializes in the air. Holding a katana in his right hand, the guy rested against her and swings his foot. With a strong leg kick, the blonde sends the katana overhead, fending off the attack of the bloody hands. Flipping over in mid-air, the guy stands on the hilt of his katana, thus avoiding contact with the bloody ground. Pushing off, the guy rushes toward the vampire. Elizabeth doesn't let her opponent near her. With a huge pillar of blood, she tosses him overhead. While in the air, the blonde becomes an easy target. Thirsty hands surround the guy again. As he falls, the man considers his surroundings. He realizes that he must not step on the bloody terrain. The area looks very suspicious, but also the red hands only appear from there. Can this ability be used anywhere, or does this ability have a limited damage area? Thought the guy. Though the form is different all the time, it's obviously always blood magic. So she's most likely a vampire? But I've heard there are very few blood mages. The blonde continued to ponder. The man is accumulating mana in his hand. After a moment, he creates several knives. And the question of how she knows about the idol fantasy looms in his mind. A guy gets too many questions he wants answers to. With a sharp motion, the blonde throws his daggers at the red hands, splitting them open. Elizabeth doesn't understand how he manages to destroy bloodthirsty hands with ordinary daggers. Each knife stabs into the ground, creating some sort of foothold for the guy's maneuverability. Landing on them, he aims for his opponent again. Approaching the right distance, the guy grasps the hilt of the katana. In a very strange but effective way, the guy stops in front of the vampire without touching the ground. After noticing that she didn't have much physical strength, she was a magic-type player, so she could easily dodge physical attacks. Inspecting the ground that wasn't stained with blood, the guy also realized that her ability had a limited damage area. Dipping his finger into the blood, the guy dabbed it lightly. Seeing this, Elizabeth wondered what he was doing now. The guy stuck a bloody finger in his mouth. What he saw made the vampire uncomfortable. What kind of crazy bastard was he? How could he eat her? "Bingo!" shouted the guy. From the look on his face, he was onto something. So, the guy has an opponent with an attack whose area of effect doesn't allow him to walk freely on the ground. Plus, he's free to dodge physical attacks and deal damage from afar with minions. Taking the mask out of the portal, the man wondered if she would be able to avoid attacks she couldn't see. As the blonde thinks through his moves, Elizabeth is still in shock at what she's seen. Why does she have to fight such a crazy asshole when she just wanted to relax? A battle between two monsters isn't so bad, the guy said. The vampire didn't like being called a monster. The blonde put on the mask and began to disappear. He was amused that the vampire didn't think he was a monster. After completely disappearing, a distinctive sound was heard at the point of his last stay. He flanked the vampire, chanting that they were both monsters whether she liked it or not. Moving around the daggers, the boy crept closer to his target. Elizabeth sensed his presence and turned around. The man was very close to his opponent and strikes with his katana. The sword reaches the vampire's neck. It seems the fog skill didn't work this time. This moment seemed quite strange, as if nothing had happened. The boy stood on the dagger again. Thick blood ran down the blade of his katana. The blonde noticed Elizabeth's use of the ability as he stabbed her. He would be impressed by such an action. Looking at her opponent, the woman held her injured neck. Even though she did not let her guard down, she was unable to track his movements. Elizabeth looked at him and realized that he was no ordinary person, but something special. And the guy in turn talked about how she should look at her superpowers and realize that they were both monsters. "Watch your mouth. I don't want someone like you calling me a monster," Elizabeth replied. As the woman thinks of how to overpower her opponent, she drops a thin thread of infected mana. "If he keeps dodging, I'll lose due to time running out. And that crazy bastard keeps attacking me," thought the vampire. At that moment, the thread came down to the ground and touched the bloody ground. Elizabeth is sure the guy's definitely going to try to kill her, which means she has only one choice. She slowly removes her hand from his neck, and the cut disappears before her eyes. The assassin has also noticed that his physical attacks, which are not accompanied by mana, do not bring any results. So he has to resort to the only way to complete the quest. The man has weighed all the data from this battle to find an advantage, and there's probably one lead. She's pretty easily taken in by his provocations, so there's only one thing he can do in this situation. To catch the monster, you have to trick the monster. The rivals thought in sync. "Hey, you don't have much time left, do you?" the guy asked mockingly. And that was indeed the case. There was a little over 1 minute left on the timer before the item obtained for the first part of the quest expired. Offering to speed up, the guy began to move quickly between the daggers again. He mockingly repeated that Elizabeth was a common monster. He was trying to piss her off. The vampire was furious. She couldn't take the bullying from this jerk. She uses blood magic again, summoning executioner's hands. Huge red hands armed with swords struck chaotically around the vampire. Watching all of this, the guy was amused by what was happening. He was impressed by her strength. Appearing in the air, the guy said over and over again that she was now behaving in a manner befitting a true monster. "Shut up!" Elizabeth shouted, slapping her palm on the ground. Using the Impaler's territory skill, the woman summoned huge tentacles that rushed straight towards the guy. The assassin noticed how his taunts hurt the vampire's feelings. "Now!" shouted the boy, looking at Elizabeth. As the woman tries to figure out what he means, a large rod appears behind her back. There was an explosion. A blue fog of mana surrounds everything. Time remaining, 59 seconds. Landing on the hilt of a protruding dagger, the guy glared in the direction of his opponent. There was another guy standing there, using the same rod. When the fog settled, the guy didn't find the vampire's body in front of him. Was she really done? But suddenly he heard a great whoosh overhead. When he looked up, he saw Elizabeth rushing toward him. Flying closer, Elizabeth grabbed the insolent man's head, and with all her might, she pinned his face to the ground. Rising from her knees, she noticed another group of people in front of her, and at that moment, the blonde man jumped up. The woman heard a jolt behind her. The assassin tries to attack again, hoping that Elizabeth was distracted enough and wouldn't have time to dodge. A red hand with a sword blocks a punch from the blonde man, and afterward, utilizes the amplitude to execute a monstrous front kick on his opponents. Elizabeth hasn't had time to fully heal her neck, and her opponent is doing his best to scatter her attention. Time remaining, 46 seconds. One of the group that was in front throws his shield to the ground. He draws his sword and lunges to attack the vampire. Elizabeth is shocked to find her opponent still on their feet. The woman thinks of a plan to hide in the fog skill, but doesn't notice the other person attacking her from her left side. A handful of fire came too close. Suddenly, a sword blade pierces the vampire's body. For some unknown reason, Elizabeth actually sets herself up to be hit with a sword rather than fire. Even the fire mage didn't expect her to dodge the other way. A red hand grabs the offending man's face and presses him into the ground, breaking bones and shattering flesh. The swordsman lets go of his sword with one hand and grabs the vampire by the neck, trying to somehow secure the woman in one position. The assassin asks to hold her tight and starts moving on the daggers. Another attempt to attack his opponent. The blonde yells for his partner to hold her tightly, otherwise he will die. But suddenly, he hesitated for a moment. The boy saw the sly smile on Elizabeth's face, and the remaining time, 22 seconds. The katana is rapidly approaching its target, and a swing of such power is unlikely to be stopped. Elizabeth's body disappears at the most crucial moment. Katana is left alone with the black-haired guy. The killer blows his former partner's head off with a single blow. And Elizabeth, in the form of a cat, is grateful for his cooperation. She turns back into a vampire and uses threads of infected mana. Elizabeth screams at the killer because always, only he was the real monster. Time remaining, 19 seconds. The blonde rushes over to Elizabeth and notices infected mana rising from the ground. The vampire uses the skill Puppetry, Strings of Servitude. The strings envelop the blonde man's body and limbs, giving him no chance to move. Elizabeth, with great speed and force, shakes her opponent. She then pins him to the bloody ground. His body was literally crucified in a huge pool of blood. The guy couldn't believe that she was hiding mana under the area of effect of the ability. Although he had initially sensed a strange energy, she was just setting traps and all she had to do was wait for him to fall into it. "Did you really think I would fall for your taunts?" Elizabeth asked. The guy lost because he let his guard down, and his allies were pretty weak. "It'll be fun beating you," the guy said with a sneer. "GG, I'll see you again," he continued. Elizabeth asked what he meant. Suddenly, a spray of blood flew straight into the vampire's surprised face. Wiping her cheek, she looked at his body. "What, he's dead?" the woman asked indignantly. Time remaining, 7 seconds. Hidden quest number 2 has been completed. PvP arena quest, night walk completed. Reward received. A short time later at Chanson's apartment, a familiar headpiece stands near the windows, trying to see something. "Do you know how surprised I was to see you this morning?" Chanson asked. He looked at Elizabeth, who was very badly bandaged. The veterinary clinic had decided that Chanson was a giraffe when they saw the condition he had brought his cat to them in. "I wouldn't die even if you abandoned me." "What's all the fuss about?" Elizabeth asked. She was probably right about something. But yesterday the cat had been perfectly healthy, and this morning it was bleeding in Chanson's living room. Ergo, it was very disturbing. "You make it sound like I'm really your pet," Elizabeth said angrily, "but it's technically true." The boy questioned what had happened while he was traveling to his parents' house. "I fought," the cat said contentedly, licking her paws. But the look on Chanson's face was simply indescribable when he heard who she had to fight against. "Against the Empty Fantasy Guild." The cat mewed. The boy inquired how sure she was of her speculations, to which Elizabeth replied that by the look of them, she was 100% sure. And on top of that, it seemed to her that they had already killed several people. One day, a guy told Elizabeth about how no one knew how the Void Fantasy Guild came to be. And it was the plain truth. Because of them, a lot of players died before they could become heroes. "Honestly, the boys were nothing special," Elizabeth said defiantly. Only one of all the bullies was able to hurt the cat. He was the only one who stood out. Johnson wanted to know where the guy who hurt her was now. Did she remember the place where it happened? He won't show up there again, Elizabeth said. The guy was seriously thinking about this problem. He wanted to drag Yoon Tae-hyun into it already. The cat looked at him like he was crazy. I beat them all, Elizabeth said. And Johnson hadn't taken in the information yet. He was really thinking about the fact that she wouldn't have been able to fight in that guise. But then as I realized, he was very much surprised at what he heard. Jumping onto the balcony railing, the cat said that this quest wasn't that hard. As she landed, she transformed into a vampire and sat down comfortably. Now, thanks to the quest completed, she can regain her true appearance. She remembered what constituted a source fragment. This is an object that restores a lost ability. The wielder can restore lost, stolen, and taken abilities. The number of fragments required to fully restore an ability depends on the strength of the ability. Johnson wondered, had her powers returned to her? Not yet, only 1/5 of them, Elizabeth replied. And what happened to the guy you fought? Sapper asked. Elizabeth was angry that he could have congratulated her first and only then inquired about the outcome of that fight. But the guy didn't care about congratulations, he cared about the outcome. The vampire was trying to keep him alive, to question him about everything, but he suddenly just died. Jong Seong didn't expect to hear such a thing, because last time the situation had ended quite abruptly. Did his body accidentally explode? Johnson asked. The vampire was surprised, for that was indeed the case. Suddenly, a heavy knock on the door interrupted their dialogue. The guy certainly wasn't expecting visitors today. Elizabeth turned into a cat again and followed the guy. Taking the doorknob, the boy had a suspicion that Elizabeth might have been followed. Opening the door slightly, Johnson looked out onto the floor. At first glance, the landing was empty, and the guy started to open the door wider. And no sooner had he said there was no one here. He discovered an old acquaintance. The same feathered boss stood on the threshold in front of Johnson's door. Found it, said the bird looking at the boy. Before he could say another word, the door slammed shut in front of the bird's beak. It was quite strange to see such behavior from a weapon maker. Even Elizabeth wondered what was going on. There's a monster in there, the guy said awkwardly. The cat was shocked. What was he even talking about? The bird standing outside the door was screaming at the top of its voice, demanding to be paid right now. The boy didn't understand why she'd come, and anyway, they'd beaten her last time. Elizabeth was also making a fuss, complaining that she was in no condition to fight. The frantic cries of the bird will attract unnecessary attention from the neighbors, which is not at all to be allowed. What the hell is going on? One of the neighbors looked out into the hallway. But he didn't find a soul, probably one of the kids playing around. Meanwhile, a guy sitting on a tile is cradling an oddball bird in his apartment. I demand payback, muttered the feathered friend unhappily. Johnson, looking at the bird, couldn't understand one thing. Why was the monster behaving this way? Or maybe he wasn't a monster at all. Looking at the bird, they both heard a rumbling in their stomachs. There was an awkward pause. Both creatures were silent. The feathered one lowered its head and asked to be fed. That's a turn of events no one expected, after opening a can of canned tuna for cats. The guy offered such a snack to his uninvited guest. I don't have any food since I recently returned here, Jung Seon said awkwardly. He had bought this food for the cat, but she had decided to refuse such a treat. Looking at the boy, Elizabeth asked, did he really think she would eat that? Anyway, while the feathered one would be eating, the guy wanted to ask a few questions. He thought again that the situation was as absurd as possible. The bird ate the treat and didn't mind answering a few questions from the landlord. The guy hadn't expected to be able to convince the monster to respond to his request so quickly. The first question is, how did the feathered man find this place? I know where my stuff is, always, replied the bird. Maybe then the monster could answer the other question. The guy couldn't use mana in the islands of boundless sky. Was it something to do with the bird? Did it somehow block his abilities? Feathered thought. But he didn't fully understand what Johnson meant. Don't know, replied the boss. Jong Seong sighed heavily when he heard that. He must be out of his mind if he was talking to a monster. It seemed like a good idea to the guy at first, but it's more likely he's just wasting his time. Putting his index finger up, he asked another question. How did he escape from the islands? Since it's a gate monster, I don't know what it can pull, the boy thought. After this question, the guy intends to eliminate the bird. Feathered reported that a friend had helped him. The boy started to ask who this friend was. The boss began to remember past moments before traveling to the world where Chonson lives. The little boy talks about wanting to send a bird after a player who broke the rules of the game. It's up to the feathered boss to make the game fair. In this game, he has a role to play as a catcher. Chonson felt as if he had an epiphany. He must have remembered something very important. The ogre's huge clawed feet dangled in the air. A man is holding a large ogre by the neck, using tentacles of infected mana. He's a little disappointed that they're just NPCs, and he wanted it to be sentient. But unfortunately, that was impossible, and the only solution was to simply snap the ogre's neck. Finishing the dirty deed, he tossed his body into a pile of other dead ogres. The man in the coat must gather more players to create a weapon. He'd heard it from someone, somewhere, sometime. When that very day comes and the end of the world arrives, a being will appear to listen to the pleas of the desperate. A huge black wing spreads, and there will be a blackbird in this world. The man didn't know what he was begging for or sacrificing. He just clung to the untold mana with all his might. But since he's in this isolated dimension, she's of no use here. He doesn't even remember what he tried to do to her. But now he knows what he needs. He'll save all the people who were turned by mere toys, and will destroy this system. But first, he needs to create a weapon that can kill a god. A few days later, a black car speeds off in an unknown direction. Woo Hein was sitting in the car, having a phone conversation with Yoon Tae-hyun. Dae-hyun talked about everything he had heard from Jung Seon the last time they met. He talked about the end of the world and Jung Seon's second life. Hein wondered if Tae-hyun believed what he'd heard from the supporter. Honestly, no, the guild leader replied. But on the other hand, if you think about it, their current situation is also hard to believe. It's only been 20 years since The Rift and The Awakened came out. It is only now that a system is announced that causes the Awakened to become players. And then there's the Inspirer with ridiculous possibilities. Right behind Performer and Priestess, Tae-hyun said. Woo Hein was surprised to hear that they had finally found him. Dae-hyun said that if it hadn't been Jung Seon's words, he would have thought that some evil god had gotten bored and decided to turn the whole world into a game. Woo Hein tries to figure out the location of where she should go. Meanwhile, Tae-hyun pulls out her sword and says she has nothing to worry about. And what do you think you're going to do? Asked Hein. To which the guild leader replied that Chonson had come to see him recently. He said something that was very hard to believe. The support staff holds out the phone to Yoon Tae-hyun. What is this? The man asked in surprise. Jongson explained that it was a monster that had recently come to him. The guild leader compared it to the very boss the boy described. It was the same as the boss of the Boundless Sky Islands, after all. It was him. He was able to trace Chonson's infected mana. I think he himself is the spawn of infected mana, said the boy. Yoon Tae-hyun was puzzled. Where was that monster now? Couldn't the guy just leave it behind? Saport was calm and asked him not to worry about the monster. Weapon Maker has a contract with him. Then why are you telling me this? Yoon Tae-hyun asked in surprise. The boy replied that he planned to use the feathered one, and he had his reasons. Though this idea was not to the guild leader's liking at all. This monster, boss, bird, whatever you want to call him, he called himself the Dodge. The man thought for a moment. In his experience, the guy knows many cases where monsters with a lot of polluted mana guarded dungeons with a rank error. If the bird is able to track such a thing, it will be useful when raiding dungeons. The guild leader tried to interrupt the sapporter, but the guy was still going on. The guy said it wasn't just him that would use it. Other people could get in too. What do you mean? Tae-hyun asked. Sapport wants to join a subsidiary guild, Overkill. But the guild leader clarified that they don't have daughter guilds, Sanka Guild. Unlike the main guild, which raids dungeons from S to B rank. The Sanka Guild is made up of awakened lower ranks who raid dungeons below B rank. In theory, Overkill should have created a subsidiary by now. In your past life? Do you know why? Yoon Tae-hyun asked. Shin Chong-seong recalled raiding an unconfirmed dungeon at the request of the Hunters Association. The entire top of the Overkill Guild, except for Dae-hyun, had to die then. And everyone from the Sinhwa Guild, including the head of the guild, Kim Il-hyuk, died. The Sinhwa Guild, having lost its awakened S and A ranks, disbanded. And the Overkill Guild created a subsidiary guild, Sanka, to take in the remaining suppressed members of the Sinhwa Guild. Looking at Shin Chongson, the guild leader never once thought of seriously believing the guy. About the man in front of him, knowing what the future held. So you want the Sanka Guild to start winning victories and nurturing the heroes of the future, said the guild leader. This was exactly what Shin Chong-seong expected to hear from his friend. Yoon Tae-hyun asked the weapon maker to answer one question. What became of me in your past life? The guild leader asked. The guy replied that Yoon Tae-hyun had died. His body was found 3 months later in broad daylight. With his throat slit, it was as if the awakened S rank was nothing. This answer shocked the guild leader. This whole conversation, he also told Woo Hein. Is it true? She asked. Yes. In my previous life, the culprit was never found. The guild leader summarized. Then, Shin Chong-seong, as if he knew what the guild leader's next question would be. The guy said, I prepared something that will repel the attack, and handed the gift to Yoon Tae-hyun. The guild leader drew his sword from its sheath to examine it. They clearly didn't have to worry about maintenance costs now. Ring blade, flame boundary. Object rank, a rank. A sword forged from chilled materials, created specifically to hold the user's mana surge. When we met, I considered why your weapons break so easily, said the weapon maker. It wasn't because of a lack of durability. It was because it couldn't withstand Yoon Tae-hyun's mana flow. The Leviathan that Dae-hyun used in the dungeon last time was created using infected mana. So without Shin Jung-seong, Yoon Tae-hyun wouldn't be able to use it again. Therefore, the supporter created something of the form that was familiar to the guild leader, a sword. But since the sapper has little mana, he was unable to create a higher-ranked weapon. But this sword should be able to withstand the maximum mana discharge at least 3 times. I'm grateful for that. But you always try to win the favor of hero candidates by creating weapons for them? Yoon Tae-hyun asked. Yoon. Yes, I'm a weapon maker, Shin Chong-seong said with a smile. That was all the guild leader wanted to tell Woo Hein. The last thing the guy said was that maybe he would ask Woo Hein for a favor soon. The girl was in a bad mood to say the least. She doesn't really want to do a favor for someone who came from the future. In fact, it was something that should have been spoken of earlier. After all, Woo Hein is now going on a business trip. Yoon Tae-hyun was surprised, for she had only recently returned, and now she was setting off again. You know that S-rank healers are rare in the world, she explained. There's nothing you can do about it, Yoon Tae-hyun replied. The man also has things to focus on. Right now, he must prepare the Sanka Daughter Guild. A few days later, in one of the dungeons, a guy with brown hair resents the strange balance of the group. His name is Hyo Jaek, and he's a B-rank tracker. He had heard that Sanka's affiliated guild was doing trials, and he was hoping for something worthwhile. But he wasn't at all happy to be in a group with a B-rank assassin and a D-rank sappert. I mean, we're a new guild, and I've temporarily come to help out from the main one, Dojin replied. As he passed by, a sturdy man knocked the boy so that he lost his balance and fell to his knees. If the little guy doesn't like it, he can get the hell out of here, said the man, pointing his finger at Jeek. Seopil C-rank mage, Dojin started asking Shin Jung-seon about the raid. He agreed to help, but why would he go with those 2 guys? Is there a problem? Sapport asked. Killer points a finger in the direction of those 2 newcomers. They're probably the problem. They're about to fight, even though they met just 30 minutes ago. One of them is a tracker, but in tank gear, and the mage has a sword. Is that right? Dojin asked worriedly. At this moment, the enemies are already watching them. Shin Jung-seon responded that their equipment suited their abilities. Sappert sensed the tracking as well. The first battle was about to come. Who are you? Why are you snapping at me? Jeek asked. Snarling? It just pisses me off that you're whining and complaining even though we haven't even entered the dungeon yet, replied Seopil. The guy demanded to see the guild's registration documents and wanted to talk to the head of the Overkill Guild. He wanted to know if the dungeon was safe. The guy thought it was very strange. After all, he doesn't have any special abilities, but the employment site wrote to him first. It said that he would find out the terms of the test when he got in. Seopil continued to humiliate the guy, but suddenly he heard something. The monster jumped down from the tree branch and rushed to attack. A huge shield protected the guys from the attack. Dojin saw the monsters and wanted to rush to help, but Shin Chong-seong stopped him. The captor began to slowly approach the new recruits and tell them why he had invited them into the guild. There were 3 reasons. The first reason was that they were poor guys, so joining the guild for money and no questions asked. The second reason, the 2 of them would make a perfect tandem. The third reason, Shin Jung-seong paused for a long time. He remembered a moment in his past life when the heroes had to get to a certain place, and on the way they had to deal with a huge number of monsters. They looked toward the huge beam of light. They were outraged by this order because this mission was telling them to go and die. The guys just looked at each other in silence and set off on the road. "Well, if that's what it takes, we'll do it," they said. It was the only thing they could do. The third reason is that if they are ordered to, they will carry out the order without further ado. "As you made sure, as long as I'm here, you won't die in this place," said the supporter confidently. From that moment on, Shin Jung-seong begins their ordeal. They must defeat the monsters in front of them. Genderuwo is a D-rank humanoid monster that survives by eating humans in dungeons. It has high intelligence and speed, making it difficult to attack. Throwing the backpack, the supporter said there was a condition. You have to use the weapon from the backpack. As he fell to the ground, the backpack opened completely, and a baseball bat and a tennis racket fell out. Jake was horrified, for it was hard to call it a weapon. Hearing a wild scream, the boys turned around. The monster is attacking again! The test has begun! Taking the available weapons in hand, they prepared themselves. Seopil armed himself with a tennis racket and his partner with a baseball bat. They got into a fighting stance and waited for further instructions. The first order of business was to test the subject's abilities. The boys brought their weapons up to them and began to scrutinize them. A baseball bat is a B-rank foul ball. Can change the direction of a flying object after it has been hit. The direction of flight is user selectable. Without a specific command, the object will fly towards an ally within the user's range. This ability can only be used on spherical objects. Tennis racket heavy B-rank attack. When attacking an object, it increases the strength of the hit and the damage dealt. Jake was surprised that guns have powers. But there's one problem. The guy doesn't have any balls. Chonson said the guy could make them, using his shape-shifting ability. As Jake looks at the sapperter in surprise, the monster approaches him. Jake manages to close in time from his opponent with his shield. The shape-shifting ability totally sucks. The guy shouted out and pushed the monster away with his other ability. Bouncing poke gives elasticity to selected objects. The increased elasticity always stays within the range set by the player. Having flown a great distance, the monster clings with its claws to the ground and slows down. Looking at Chonson again, the guy wondered what he should do with the sucky ability. After all, he'd be able to do those balls for literally a couple seconds. "Your powers don't suck. You just don't know how to use them," replied Support. Chonson asks to trust him, and he'll reveal why the guy got the tracker class. The guy decides to believe the supporter and do what they want him to do. Hyo Jaek, before he came to Jungseon along with Seopil in his past life. He stayed on low-level teams as a tank, which didn't suit him at all. Unlike Han Chia, Jake needed to work on his weapon and partner to revitalize his specialty. Support looked at the brunette and called out to him. Shin Chong-seong came as close as possible and whispered something in his ear. "Are weapons really capable of doing that?" Seopil asked. "The abilities of the weapon and the awakened are similar, trust me," Chonson said. The monster let out a loud screech again, attracting the attention of his opponents. And at that moment, Chonson heard a strange sound behind him. The Naga warriors were approaching them from behind. Naga warriors, sea-level monster. Half human, half beast that mostly appear in the jungle. Their danger level increases if they have a leader. Support asks the assassin to hold them off for a while. Chonson looks at Seopil again and asks if he's ready. The brunette nods uncertainly. Next, Support commands Jake to use his abilities. Skill. Shape-shifting. For a limited time, the object will take the shape that is most convenient for the player. After a few seconds, or at the player's request, the object will return to its normal form. Jake forms a ball in his hand. The guy tosses the ball high above him. Application of the skill Sight Calibration. Jake gets into a striking position and waits for the ball to come his way. With tremendous force, the guy hits the ball with the bat. At this time, Dojin takes on the Naga warriors. The monster runs towards the ball and tries to catch it. Suddenly, the ball takes its original shape and turns into a shield. The shield fends off the monster with monstrous force. Jake can't believe his eyes. It actually worked. Weapon Maker creates another shield and asks the guy to keep it up. A smile graced Jake's face. It didn't seem so hopeless now. Across the room, Dojin is already fighting in close combat. And while one Naga warrior is busy with the assassin, another formed ball is already flying at the other. The serpent manages to dodge and the ball flies further away. At this point, the support says it's time for the brunette. Seopil uses the blink skill. It allows him to teleport for short distances. The length of the distance depends on the user's abilities. The ball flies over the snake, hits the ground, and starts flying upwards. The ability of the object Dirty Ball is activated. A guy swings a tennis racket. He sees the ball coming towards him. Using the object skill Heavy Hit, Seopil sends the ball down again with even more speed. And as the Naga warrior watches this spectacle, he doesn't even have time to blink as the shield above him opens up and flies towards him with tremendous force. As a result of this combination, one of Naga's warriors was defeated. At such a violent rumble, the second snake took notice. She paid the price for letting her guard down and turning her back on her opponent. Jeek was glad they were able to overpower 3 monsters in a matter of seconds. It's just that the rank of the monsters depends on the level of the group, said the supporter. If they were fighting one-on-one, they wouldn't be able to win. But when they have a partner around them who can hit the ball and time it just right, they can easily beat them at the level they are at now. It wasn't easy to use, but with a little help, they would definitely be able to become top-level hunters. Looking at the bat, Jeek said that without this weapon, none of this would have been possible. The boy was in awe of the object's abilities. He had never seen anything like it before, not even the A-Rang weapons in the store. He wanted to ask how Chonson had done it, but that was classified information. If this guild is one of the top 3 in the country, it's understandable that they have their secrets, Seopil said. Weapons, skill use, partner work, it's like they're getting personalized training. These guys are in the guild that understands the system better than anyone else in the country. Supporta called Moon Dojin and asked him for a favor. Since the trials were over, Shin Jungseong asked to lead the newcomers away to the gate. Dojin clearly didn't expect the supporter to ask to lead the guys away, but after all, there was still a boss ahead. Weapon Maker only smiled and said that he had business to attend to the boss. When everyone had dispersed, the support came to the appointed place. He stood in front of huge, massive doors. A human face was painted on them. "You can come out now," Chonson said. And at the same instant, his feathered friend emerged from his pocket. Saport wondered if this was the place the bird had told him about. The bird flew out of his pocket and confirmed his words. After flying off to a safe distance, the bird returned to its original shape and size again. "Good. Since I brought you where you wanted to go, it's time to fulfill the terms of the contract," said the guy. The last time they sat at his house, Chonson had offered to make a contract so that the boy could collect contaminated mana. Feathered agreed. The system allows the bird to collect infected mana. It belongs to her. Now he will tap into it. The supporter was surprised to hear what the bird was saying about the system. Since Bird called himself a gimmick, it would be hard to fully trust him, especially not knowing who he really is. "What will you do with the infected mana I'll collect?" Shin Jungseong asked. "When you collect enough of it, mine will come back to me, of course," replied the bird. After that, she would disappear, her role ending there. The support wondered again what that role was. Finally, a guy decides to ask the name of a feathered animal. And his new friend's name is Dusk. Chonson asked if Dusk could do something for him, if the guy helped him gather enough mana. "Yes. Final reward," Sumrak replied. Suddenly, a system message appeared in front of the guy's eyes. A new main quest has been started. Main objective, collect infected mana. A strange creature offers you a deal. Help him, clear the dungeons, collect contaminated mana. Reward. Upon accepting the quest, a new area, the hidden side of the dungeon, will be unlocked for exploration. Unlock the final reward to collect contaminated mana. "Final reward?" the guy asked. The final quest reward check begins. Chonson can't believe his eyes. Is this really the one? Final reward. The ability to create a god-killing weapon. So, this is the first gate they came to after signing the contract. Looking at the system message, the guy couldn't understand why Dusk had said this was the perfect place for him and dismissed the other gates. Active ability. The hidden side of the dungeon. In some normal dungeons, you will be able to explore the hidden side. Hidden sides have stronger enemies and more valuable rewards. Something else hidden may appear. The guy doesn't know what lies ahead, but things are definitely going the way they should. Dusk swings his beak, and with all his might, he punches through the crack of measurement. The passageway is open and nothing else is holding them back. Gathering his thoughts, the guy starts to approach the crack. Shin Chonson and Dusk walk in to the hidden side of the dungeon. They entered a hidden dungeon. Dusk shrank again and sat on the boy's shoulder. The hidden side looked the same. The arrangement is the same, but here everything looks more like a fake filled with contaminated mana. The guy saw the system message. Contaminated mana is contaminated. You cannot absorb it. Defeat the owner of contaminated mana to purify it. Behind their backs, some movement began. The boy realizes why the dusk has brought him here in the first place. He takes the pendant from his neck and activates it. At that moment, he is attacked by a huge naga. She strikes hard where the guy was. The tip of the pendant stuck into the top of the cave. The guy's hanging onto it like a rope. He looks down and realizes that this is exactly what he needs. Infected Raja Naga. Danger level, B rang. The leader of all Naga creatures, commanding them. Due to contamination by polluted mana, has mutated into a stronger form. Naga uses an additional hidden side monster skill, Hidden Polluted Mana. Shin Jongseong lands a magic pendant wrapped around his body. He holds a purifying tethered dart in his hands. An A-rang object. A weapon melted from an incredible amount of magical stones and refined cores. The blade is attached to a long rope and was created for a variety of purposes. Ability of the item. Aura of purity, regeneration, transformation. Hearing the sound, the sapper turned around sharply. The new mining weapon is quite interesting. Chonsun uses the Peace Grid skill and points a dozen daggers towards the sound. Naga tries to block the guy's attack by covering her face with her hands. Another additional skill of the hidden side monster, Mana Corrosion. All daggers that hit the target simply dissolved. Smiling Naga said his mana was too weak. In fact, the guy didn't expect her to die from something like this. He was even glad that he would be able to show something more interesting. Skill. Demonic Weapon Creation. The guy already has a weapon created. Call upon the demonic sword of Fragarak. Looking closely, Naga was surprised. The guy was able to create a sword from contaminated mana. Queen Raja Naga realizes that this could be dangerous for her, and it's worth keeping a close eye on the situation to dodge in time. She doesn't even have time to think about it before the guy uses the World Mesh skill and stabs her. Naga looks down at his left hand. After a while, she begins to feel pain and realizes she has lost her left arm. While Raja Naga tries to be defiant, Fragarak's sword approaches her again. The strike misses its target, Naga vanished into thin air again. Chonsun kicks ahead and points the sword in a new trajectory. Though the direction was right, the sword goes through again. A skill that internalizes contaminated mana. He should stop it any way he can, because if he doesn't, it'll be hard to land a good blow. Naga reappears behind the guy's back. The moment the sapper turns to her, she spits an incomprehensible green substance. Chonsun manages to block the attack. When her poison and shield come in contact, an explosion occurs. A huge cloud of Naga poison spreading through the cave. Fortunately, the guy has an item that can fight poison. Aura of Purity. Neutralizes poisons and negative energy of B rank and below within a 5-meter radius. A system message warns the SOS that the monster's skill. Mana Corrosion depletes the guy's mana with Poison Cloud. After reading this warning, the guy throws the dagger at the ceiling of the cave thinking that this way he can dodge. The dagger reaches the ceiling and locks firmly there. At this point, Raja Naga is rapidly approaching the place of fixation. Meanwhile, Sapert hangs in the air, unaware of anything. A sharp swipe of the tail at the fixation point and the guy flies back to the ground. It was clearly not his softest landing. Chonsun is trying to get back to his feet as quickly as possible. He aims his palm, but due to the lack of mana, he can't do anything. His paltry amount of mana seems to have run out. The sword just lies dead weight. "Now do your duty as a victim!" shouted Raja Naga as she pounced on the unarmed sapper. The boy began to smile softly. Doesn't she still know who the top predator is here? He activates the item's regeneration ability, and thereby fully restores his mana. At the same moment, the World Grid skill is activated again, and the sword is already flying to deliver a killing blow. No sooner does Naga get to the guy than a sword pierces her head. Rajnag's breathless body falls to the ground. Chonsun defeated the possessor of contaminated mana. The process of purifying the mana from the contaminated mana takes place. You have cleared the hidden side of the dungeon. The amount of contaminated mana absorbed is increased. Contaminated mana received, 200 units. Contaminated mana accumulated, 450 units. Contaminated mana available, 200 units. You've collected enough polluted mana and unlocked a new disassembly and reassembly ability. New ability, I think I can use it right away, thought the supporter. He saw the most important item, the Raja Nagafang. That's probably the one he should collect. The poisonous fang of the infected Raja Naga. Difficulty: B grade. The poisonous fang of Raja Naga, king of snakes with mana-enhanced poison. Dusk came out of his pocket and looked at the fang and said he knew what it was, the wound burning with hellfire from it. But with his newfound skill, the guy will be able to make it a cure. Active disassembly skill. Can disassemble objects to restore components for its creation. Disassembled components are saved in a separate place and can be used to create a new weapon. You can disassemble an object once a day. Active skill, gathering. Combines components and items to create new components and objects. The item can be saved depending on the method of gathering. Items and components that cannot be collected will disappear. You can collect an item once per day. The guy grabbed the tied dart and used the item's disassembly on it. You have dismantled the item. You received a magic stone 3 pieces, a purified spirit core 1 piece, a giant's finger 1 piece. The guy's next action is to use the gathering. He collects from the poisonous fang of the infected Raja Naga and the purified spirit core. Skill collection successfully activated. Item obtained, purified poison fang of Raja Naga. Purified poison fang of Raja Naga. Difficulty to obtain, A grade. Has been purified with divine power and spirit power. It also has a strong healing effect. Once administered, significantly increases the user's mana and physical abilities. The guy never thought he'd use it in this life, too. He sinks that fang into his shoulder with all his might. I'm slowly penetrating his body. In terrible pain, Johnson fell to the ground. Through his veins, the poison is distributed throughout his body. It's just unbearable pain. He's clenching his teeth with all his might. It seems like it's time to go to the dentist. It seems as if he is about to be torn to pieces. The guy can't hold back any longer and starts screaming. Suddenly, it emits a huge flash of light. It seems the process of refining it has come to an end. He rises to his feet, radiating great energy. He is fully on his feet and looking straight ahead. The minimum training is over with, Shin Jungseong said. The amount of mana of the supporter has doubled thanks to the poison absorption. His body became brighter and more agile. Grasping the hilt of his demonic sword, the guy yanked it out of Rajnag's head with a light movement. Noticing how easy it was, he assumed that his strength had increased as well. Roughly now, with just his strength alone, he could be a B-rank fighter. Chonson called up the characterization windows. Item: Purified Poison Fang of Rajanaga absorbed. Strength, dexterity, and mana increased. Obtained feature: increased mana and its recovery. Improved physical strength. Received aura of purification that cleanses poisons of B rank and below, as well as negative energy within a 5-meter radius. Player information. Name: Shin Jongseong. Tisrang, weapon creator, style, summoner type creator. Features: second chance. Rank: Enforcer. Strength 3, Dexterity 2, Mana 3, Intelligence 4, Defense 2, Damage 2. It's not time to rejoice yet, but if he collects the rest of the items, he can increase his growth rate. Approaching Rajnaga's body, the guy noticed something. There's a red stone sticking out of her neck. He got it. It was the essence of Rajanaga. Difficulty to obtain: B-Rang. A crystal consisting of Snake King, a deadly poison, capable of curing all poison of B-Rang and above. This time, the guy got all the right items from this boss. There's a man running through the woods somewhere. The blonde looks around and runs for his life. Slowing down a bit, he looks around. He doesn't have time to ask a question before suddenly, the forest behind his shoulders is cut down by someone. But it wasn't just the trees that got him, it was his head. A silhouette appeared in the fog, the same blonde man Elizabeth had fought. Main quest: eliminate rivals, completed. You defeated the awakened Tisrang and received 500 million won. Looking at the system message, the guy freaked out a little. If he had come this quest in the beginning, he wouldn't have had to organize a stupid theft. Taking off his mask, he asked the system to open the store. The exclusive store of the members of the guild, Empty Fantasies. Please select the item you wish to purchase. There was nothing special on the first page. Mana potion, healing potion, low-rank weapon summoning, communication crystal summoning. Guy immediately asked to flip to the premium store. The menu of the exclusive Pioneer Premium Store opens. Welcome Chu Yun. Me exclusive Premium Pioneer Store. Please select the item you wish to purchase. This list was more expensive, but the variety was also surprising. Blast Potion, Recovery Elixir, Body Snatcher, B-Rank, A-Rank, and S-Rank Crusher. and these items were beyond the blond man's means. And before he could think about it properly, a related quest appeared. Eason is looking at the task at hand with great reliability. He wants to make some more money, and the reward is quite decent, 1 billion won. Well, in principle, he'll be able to afford a B-rank gate crusher. B-rank gate crusher. Difficulty to obtain. Purchase. A crystal that destroys the gates of B-rank and below. Once you place it in the dungeon, monsters will enter the gate after a while. While the guy is picking things out of the store and looking up the name of the person to eliminate, someone is watching him from behind a tree. After noticing him and watching him, the man realized that it was true that some bastard was killing the players. He realized he couldn't handle it alone. So he put his hand in his pocket to call for help. At that moment, a hand grabbed the tracker's neck. The man realized he had been exposed. The stakeout failed. "Are you trying so hard to denounce me?" Yesin asked. And without even giving the guy a chance to respond, he blew his head off his shoulders. He did it on the first try with a slight movement of his hand. Once more, he looked at the tracker's body and asked him not to follow it from now on. Yesin rushed off to fulfill the quest. Time to make some money. Meanwhile, at the Overkill Guild office, Yoon Tae-hyun calls the support team and says there's a problem. He reported that a guild member who had been observing some candidates at his request had died. The guild leader held up a clipboard with a report. There were pictures of the two dead. At the same time, the same thing happened in Shin Chonen's past life. The Hunters Association knew there would be animosity between the Awakened and the townspeople, so they tried to keep it as secret as possible. Nothing much has changed. No casualties were properly reported in the news, and the scene check was quickly completed. The Hunters Association is not helping in any way. Therefore, it is necessary to solve the issue from the guild's point of view. After all, if they know about the further actions of the criminal, it is necessary to protect them in advance. And not to waste this moment, there should be another incident today around the same time. If they manage to protect their target, the perpetrator will definitely start looking for them. It's up to them to protect this man from everything at all costs. Chonsun will personally look into the matter. And for a guild leader, there's something else. Evening, people are walking along the streets of the city. The secretary of the Sinhwa Guild, strolling along with his dog through the evening city. There's a guy watching her from the roof. He watches her every move. Apparently, she is his target to be eliminated. She turned into an alley and continued on her way. She feels someone watching her and stops. Turning around, she asks for the man who is following her to show himself. She turned to him because he's been following her since she got off work. Maybe he's got something to say to her. The man began to come into the light. The vice guild master of Overkill, Jong Myungun, was standing in front of her. He asked how she noticed him. "When I'm being stalked by someone, only strangers don't know about it," replied the girl. She was sure that this wasn't some sort of declaration of war. But then what business could there be with the Overkill Guild? Myungun decided to tell her everything. They put together a team to protect the girl, and as soon as she asked from whom, they heard someone approaching. The dog started barking madly. Eason didn't choose the right moment and decided to attack directly head-on. Myungun rushed to the rescue, covering the girl with himself. The katana strike was so strong that it shattered his opponent's shield into pieces. The defender started to attack back but missed. The assassin looked at the girl, frustrated that he was being interrupted. After all, he could end this in a heartbeat. Why, some outsider is interfering with the task at hand. Myungun advised the girl to run away as fast as possible, but with her speed, it was unlikely to succeed. Then the man decides to act differently. He smashes his armor on the ground and uses the stone skin skill. At that moment, huge stone plates grow out of the ground. The man jumps out of them while the passage is still open. Meanwhile, Eason is using the basic technique of first sword form. He is ready to meet his opponent. The stone wall practically closed in to protect Sohee from the assassin. Eason uses the skill Screaming Ghostly Flash. He hit several targets at once with his strongest blow. Moving behind the girl's back, the guy brought the katana up to her neck. "This is the end," Eason said. In that instant, a shield materialized and blocked the movement. Immediately after, the assassin managed to dodge the sword attack. The blonde was confused as to why someone was interfering with him again. Now, Chonsun intervened in the fight. "There's no point in explaining anything to you because you're about to die," said the weapon maker, using the Network World skill. With a wave of his hand, Chonsun aimed dozens of sharp mana swords at his opponent. Looking at the blades flying at him, Eason couldn't believe that there were players in the world who could summon weapons like this. The blonde managed to remain calm even in such a situation. He was able to dodge the boy's attack, even though it was more dangerous than he had originally thought. Dodging the swords one by one, Eason continued to ponder where the hell these players were coming from. That blood mage, now this weapon maker. They weren't supposed to start showing up now. As he stopped attacking his opponent, Chonson took a moment to notice that he was indeed very fast. Finally, getting some time to rest, Eason asked the unfamiliar boy if he was on the same team as that cat. In response, Chonson advised the blonde with a smile on his face to try and handle him if he was so eager to find out. Lastly, to break the enemy's spirit, the guy reminded the assassin that he had lost to a mere cat. So in that case, how was he going to defeat someone like him? Yes, it's like that, Eason whispered, creating a mask of mana on his face. Abruptly, the blonde man drew his sword behind his back and shouted that he was now convinced that the weapon maker and that cat knew each other. Chonson, arm outstretched in front of him, prepared to defend himself. After materializing a mana shield, the guy began to carefully observe his opponent's actions. Recently, Elizabeth had said that this dude was using the sword line of masculinity and transparency. This information should help Jongxian a lot in this battle. While the weapon maker was casting a defense spell, Eason shouted that the boy was too slow and had already managed to get behind him. However, that was exactly what Chonseong wanted. With a wry smile, the guy snapped his fingers. In the next second, out of nowhere, some strange objects fell next to the blonde masked man. Donning his hood as the flashbang grenades exploded behind him, Chonson made sure that the attack patterns of his current opponent were too primitive. Taking advantage of the fact that the enemy is stunned and can't see anything, the weapon maker used the gathering skill on him. Eason, who still hadn't regained consciousness, felt the mana raging around him and realized that something was about to happen. He had just a moment to recognize where the danger was coming from, and with a deft swing of his sword, he was able to repel the attack. Eason was still completely blinded, but he still had the power to sense where his only opponent stood. But unfortunately for him, it wasn't just Chonson fighting against him this time. As soon as the blonde tore towards them, so he activated her animal communication skill. With this skill, she channeled mana into her dog, thus greatly enhancing its physical and magical stats. The animal immediately pounced on the enemy and knocked him to the ground. Seizing the opportune moment, Chonson created a small dagger and threw it at the immobilized enemy. The blade stabbed into the masked blonde man's shoulder as he tried with all his might to shrug off the dog gnawing at his neck. With a swing of his sword, the irritated Eason finally broke free from the animal's clutches. The man's vision slowly began to return as a system window suddenly appeared in front of his face. Blondie was notified that he had been poisoned by Nagaraji's poison, due to which his physical condition would begin to deteriorate from this point on. Eason only had time to tisk and pull his knife out of his shoulder in annoyance when Jongxian appeared above his head, ready to slaughter him with his huge two-handed sword. Not without difficulty, the assassin still managed to dodge the boy's sudden attack. However, the surprises Chonson had in store for him didn't end there. Without even looking at his opponent, the weapon maker continued to attack Eason through summoning items. Once again releasing dozens of mana swords into the enemy, Chonson sealed him to the nearest wall. At least, that's what it seemed to him at first. When the smoke from the multiple blows cleared, he saw only the mask lying on the ground. And since the weapon maker had lost sight of him, the blonde was confident that by attacking from above from the blind spot, he would be able to finish the bastard off. "What do you say to that?" Eason spoke coldly, infusing his blade with mana in flight. The technique he was about to use was the basic technique of the second form of his sword. With a sweep of his weapon to unleash the deadly ghost's path, Eason decided to finish off the woman sitting in the wheelchair first. Chonson guessed very quickly what exactly the assassin was up to, and so he rushed towards Soha as quickly as possible. The guy still managed to outrun the spell released by the blonde man. "Get in front of your partner." Weapon maker set up some mana shields along the way to try and suppress the enemy's attack. Watching what was happening, Sohee shouted that the path of the deadly ghost was too powerful and almost impossible to block. However, contrary to her expectations, Chonson managed to stop the assassin's spell with a wall of shields. Unfortunately, this entire battle had noticeably depleted the weapon maker's mana reserves, so he was no longer prepared to repel another such attack. Leaning on one knee, Chonson remembered that the poison should have already spread through the blonde man's body. All he had to do was to use the last technique correctly. As the boy got to his feet, Eason began trying to figure out why this dude was moving like he knew his every move. Who is he anyway? Did he create a strategy to counter Yosung in advance? Smiling nervously, the assassin couldn't believe he had to lose to the bastard who had become a player only a few months ago. Swinging his sword, the blonde ran towards the weapon's creator in desperation, screaming that there was no way he was losing to someone like him. Eason jumped up and was ready to strike, but suddenly his blade stopped right in front of Jongxian's hand. The dark-haired boy used a link skill with which he intercepted the assassin's sword and cut off his arm with his own weapon. The main condition under which this skill had to work was that the target's will was diminished or physically impaired. Simply put, throughout the battle, Chonsun had a final trump card up her sleeve. When he approached the defeated opponent, the weapon maker warned him that he would no longer be able to use mana because of the poison. In addition, the skill that made him die on purpose and save himself last time would no longer work. Shin Chongsun's explanation was interrupted by the girl secretary of the Sinhwa Guild. She thanked him for his help and said that she didn't understand the situation at all. Looking at the assassin with his severed arm, Chonsun promised Sohee to explain everything a little later. While they were saying this, some kind of red butterfly appeared from nowhere nearby. When the creature flew up to Isun, he immediately realized it was her. Without noticing this butterfly, Jungseon asked the girl secretary to contact Kim Il-hyuk first, while he himself calls an ambulance for them to take Jung Myung-gun. Meanwhile, the butterfly flew up to Isun and sat on him, leaving only a huge pool of blood in its place. Seeing their target literally vaporize before their eyes, Chan Seong and Sohee froze in place in surprise. In the same second, the pool of blood that formed on the ground bloomed with hundreds of red flowers. Meanwhile, Isun had already woken up in a place unknown to him. As the blonde rose to his feet, the woman standing behind him remarked that he looked like shit. The man turned on her and yelled at her to shut up, adding that he didn't need her help. Isabel in turn advised the assassin not to get so angry about losing. Pride wouldn't change anything anyway. No matter how hard you try, Isun won't be able to do anything after rebirth anyway. Looking suspiciously at the vampire, the blonde asked why she was here, to which the woman in glasses replied that she had obviously come to help him. A member of the Desolate Fantasy Guild conscripted her by defeating her special summoning quest. To piss Isun off a bit, Isabel reminded him that unlike him, who showed up as soon as the game started, she was about at the boss level. That's why she only came out here now. And when she gets outside, what does she see in front of her? Isun's usual nonsense instead of concentrating on the game. Do you need help? Isabel asked suddenly, throwing the blonde man into a stupor. When Yesun asked what she was up to, the vampiress merely held out to him the B-rank gate crusher she had bought the other day. After that, the woman explained that while this bum was fooling around, he was very patient. And in order not to make him angry, Isun should take his head and do his minimum tasks. And as much as the blonde man would like not to become an errand boy, he hardly has any other choice, because he only has one rebirth left. Taking the object from the vampiress's hand, Isun advised her to be more careful as this world was a bit different. Yes, thank you. I'll keep that in mind, Isabel muttered confidently.
Pet the cat.